There's a lot to love about Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, but my personal favorite touch is the voice lines that characters get for their cards. It's such a simple addition that just adds so much charm to the game, and it's why I almost always make my decks exclusively out of cards that have lines with their respective characters. And with nearly 100 characters in the game, I thought I'd compile some of my favorite trivia for each of them. Some of these are going to be stretches or semi-repetitive, but either way, let's not waste any more time here. Yami Yugi will always say he discards one card to special summon the Tricky, even when he normal summons or just special summons it by another way. I guess this was an oversight on the developer's part. Kaiba only has attack and effect lines for XYZ Dragon Cannon, while its weaker fusion forms only have summon lines and none for their attacks or effects. Joey has attack lines for Lava Golem and Fiendish Engine Omega, but not one for summoning them. This is likely because neither of these cards are actually his, and he merely took control of them during the duels in which he had them. My Valentine has voice lines with Lightning Chidori. I don't think this is a reference to anything, I think this is purely just because this is a good card in a Heartbeat deck. When Taya uses Skillangel, she only has a line for its effect and not its summon or attack. If you look into the voice lines, you'll come to notice this is a trend amongst Duel Monsters characters, especially the oldest ones. For some reason, Alpha is the only Magnet Warrior Yugi has a line with, which is really odd because he doesn't actually refer to it by name, simply saying he summons a Magnet Warrior. Yugi also doesn't specify the levels of his silent monsters when he summons them, which I think is a play on how they worked in the anime, where they weren't separate monsters. Weevil Underwood calls Gokibor a rare card, a reference to the anime when he told a kid he'd give him a rare card, only to give him this instead. Rex Raptor has the second lowest amount of dialogue for unique cards, with only 11 in total, and 9 of those are monsters. Mako Tsunami gets the cut-in animation for all the monsters that he has voice lines with. This is likely due to the fact that he only has 4 of them in total, so it really wasn't all that much work. Bandit Keith has lines for the Wicked Eraser, since he had it in the Yu-Gi-Oh! R manga. It's also the only one of his voice lines for a card that currently isn't in the game yet. Ishizu Ishtar has lines for a card known as Muko, although she calls it Null and Void. That was the original name of the card before it was changed to avoid confusion with the Void cards that were releasing at the time, although Ishizu's lines were recorded before all this was happening. Odeon has voice lines with various Egyptian cards. I think the only reason he got these was just due to the sheer lack of cards that he actually had voice lines for to begin with. For some reason, Mokuba has a few voice lines that have actually been removed, those being for Shinato, King of a Higher Plane, and Labradorite Dragon. I have no idea why this was done, but it makes Mokuba the first character to have actually had his voice lines decreased. Maximilian Pegasus is randomly missing lines for a bunch of Toon cards, and I really couldn't find a 100% pattern to the ones he didn't get. Like, I thought maybe he wasn't getting lines with the GX cards or the ones that Alistair used, but it really didn't seem like there was a 100% pattern that I could find to that. I don't know, I think they just got kind of lazy here and only went with like just the most immediately recognizable, like classic ones, with a few GX ones thrown in there too. The Paradox brothers, but specifically Dox, have a line for Labyrinth of Klein, although this hasn't actually been implemented into the game yet, for some reason. Yami Bakura has a line with Macrocosmos. I assume this is just because it's one of the best known banishing cards in the entire game. Yami Merrick has a line with Card of Last Will, despite the fact that the card itself literally says it cannot be used in a duel. Arcana has lines with Double D Pandora and Pandora's Jewelry Box. That's because his Japanese name is Pandora. Pretty cool Easter egg that just gets completely lost in translation though. Bones has a line with Axe Raider, which I think is supposed to fill in for Zanki, who was initially unavailable in the game. Esper Roba has a line with Cyber Esper, presumably because it fit with his Cyber cards, it sees into his opponent's hand, just like his brothers did, and his Japanese name is Esper Roba. Basically all of Tristan Taylor's voice lines are references to something from the anime, so I'll instead shed some light on the fact that he has a skill that references the abridged series joke of, "My voice gives me super strength." Loomis and Umbra have voice lines with Valkyrion the Magna Warrior because they took control of it during their duel against Yugi and Kaiba. Duke Devlin has lines with all of the 1200 attack spaceship cards since he used Gradius in the anime. He didn't get lines for the BES cards, which were also based on the Gradius game, but Quentin did, so I guess it evens out. Solomon has lines for True Exodia, and in it, he says that he wins, despite the fact that it actually makes your opponent win. This either means the card would be errataed for Duel Links, or Grandpa's off his meds and he didn't read the card properly. For some reason, Dark Side of Dimensions Kaiba has lines for Kaiser Force Raider, but not the normal one. I assume it's because it never appeared in the movie, but the ABC cards didn't either and they got lines, so who really knows. Dark Side of Dimensions Mokuba has lines with a bunch of generic dragons, which I think are meant to balance his more serious sides now that he's older, as well as his childish side that he still kinda has. DSOD Yugi initially didn't have new Japanese voice lines for like a year. I've seen a multitude of reasons for this before, whether it be COVID, business, or just being expensive. Although the one that I think is the most plausible was one that I saw about his agency being really intense in regards to him voicing Yugi outside of anything other than the anime. Dark Side of Dimensions Joey also has a line for lava golems attacking, although here the attack name is Joey's Inferno, which is just so charming to me. Dark Side of Dimensions Taya has voice lines for various dancing related cards, such as Dancing Fairy, Dancing Elf, and Performance of Sword. This is a reference to the fact that she wants to be a dancer. Aigami uses the wrong names for Cubic Ascension and Causality, calling them Descent and Omen respectively. I think both of these names had already been revealed at this point, so I really don't know what was up here when it came to renaming them. Speaking of Aigami, him and Sarah have the exact same cards for their dialogue, which actually makes them the only characters in the entire game to have that in common. Scud is the playable character who overall has the lowest amount of voice lines, with only 4 cards. In fact, there's actually NPCs who have more dialogue than him. Dark Side of Dimensions Bakura has lines with outer entities Nyarla and Azathoth, while going out of his way to mention that he likes how creepy the two of them look. Jaden Yuki has lines with Mask Change 2, as well as Masked Heroes Acid and Dark Law. He also has a line with Thunder King Ryo, as all of these are cards he used in the manga. Zane Truesdale has lines with Doom Kaiser Dragon and Chthonian Emperor Dragon. That's because their Japanese names are similar to his original nickname, Hell Kaiser. Aster Phoenix originally had a line for Destiny hero Dangerous, referring to him by his Japanese name of Destructive Guy, although this has been removed and now he just uses generic lines for it. Jesse Anderson has lines with cards that Yubel used when she had possessed his body, such as Grinder Golem and Phantom Sky Blaster. When Chaz attacks with Ojama Yellow, he calls him the ace of his deck, which is a reference to his Season 4 duel against Aster, where he says the same thing before using Ojama Yellow to declare the game-winning attack. Despite the sheer number of characters who played it being a contributing factor to the meme, Alexis Rhodes is the only character with voice lines for Pot of Greed. You can technically hear this too, if you set up a mirror match with Jaden with Miracle Draw and take the Pot of Greed from his hand. Dr. Crowler refers to Ultimate Pound as Mechanized Melee, which is the English attack name for it. Unlike that Aster one, this line has not been removed from the game, which just makes me wonder what they were thinking with him in taking his out. Yubel has a line with elemental hero Neos, which makes sense because she also has a line with Neos Wise Man. Bastion's voice lines for Plasma Warrior Atom weren't always in the game, although they were eventually added at some point. I can't find the exact period in which that was, but I know for a fact that it happened. When Cyrus attacks with Dark Magician Girl or Thunder Nyan Nyan, his sprite will get a blush because he's down bad. Tyranno Hasselberry has a line with Dark Tyranno, which seems odd to me as that card was basically just a carbon copy of Black Tyranno, at least before it inevitably gets new effects when it's printed. He also has lines for Spacesaurus, which I brought up in my video on mysterious cards. Speaking of that video, Sartorius Kumar has lines with the missing Arcana Force cards. As some non-voice line trivia, he's the only character with custom coin toss animations, which reflects how his cards worked in the anime. Season 4 Jaden pronounces elemental hero Avion's name differently than the classic one. The original pronounced it how I just did, whereas this one pronounces it how the actual word is pronounced. Blair has lines with Raiko because she used Light Sworns in various Yu-Gi-Oh! Games. When Jim Crocodile Cook attacks with Skull Geos, you can hear him snap his fingers. This is a reference to when he did the same thing in the anime when he defeated Hasselberry. Axel Brody has lines with Dancing Fairy, Maiden of the Aqua, and Metal Silver Armor. All of these reference the Dimension World arc of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. Supreme King Jaden has lines with the various monsters that act as his minions in the anime. Yusei has a line with the card Angel Baton, which is a speed spell in the anime. It was basically his equivalent of Pot of Greed. Who really knows what him having a line for this card was meant to foreshadow, because it being a speed spell, it would either need to be reworked or just included only in the speed duel modes. When Jack Atlas plays Stardust Dragon, his chant for it is actually the original one he used for it back when he had stolen the card from Yusei. He also doesn't say either the attack or effect names, which I interpret as Jack not having the same bond with Stardust that Yusei does, but I'm probably looking too far into it. Crow has lines for Crow Goblin and Double D Crow, which reference his past as these were the first cards he ever obtained, and they were also his namesake. Akiza has a line with Titaniel, Princess of Camellias. From what I was able to find, it didn't seem like she used this in any series or game, so I assume it's just a generic rose-themed card that she got a line for. I guess that's cool. Leo's line with Comrade Swordsman of Landstar is a reference to the duel in the anime where Leo had to use a warrior-only deck, and he used this card. The line even reflects his disappointment with using a non-machine monster. Luna has a line with Dark Sage because he was the true identity of the guy she helped during the DVAC duel in the spirit world. From what I've found, Antinomy is the only character in the game who never says the tuner monster when he plays any of his tuners. Technically, Carly doesn't either, but I'm not counting that since she only has one tuner monster. Tetsu Trudge has a line with Greed to reference his fate in the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga, where he was cursed to be completely obsessed with money. Dark Signer Callan Kessler doesn't have lines with Infernity Doomslinger or Doom Dragon. I assume this is just because of how strong their ties are to the normal Callan, as they didn't forget because there's numerous cards that Dark Signer Callan has voice lines for that were played during the Crash Town arc, such as Infernity Climber. Dark Signer Carly has lines with Catoblepis and the Witch of Fate. Aside from fitting in with her overall theming, this is also the only card in the game to specifically affect monsters with an unknown attack value, which her Fortune Ladies have. Rex Goodwin has lines with all of the dual dragons from the manga, except for Stardust Spark Dragon, which was the only one he never got his hands on. Callan Kessler has a line with Trishula, Dragon of the Ice Barrier, because it was an incredibly popular card in Infernity decks back in the day. This is one of the rare instances in which a real-life thing has managed to make its way into Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links as a reference. Carly has lines with all the cards she used during her duel with Jack. The lines for Exploder Dragonwing and Strong Wind Dragon in particular are especially adorable. Primo has lines with Absurd Stealer and Ally Salvo. The former was used by Lester, and Primo uses basically all of his and Jacob's cards. The latter was used by Primo's Duelbot army too. Aporia doesn't have a line with Sparkbreaker or Labyrinth of Klein. He has lines with other Primo cards, but not those two, I guess. For some reason, Paradox doesn't have a line with Malefic Force, despite it having been in the game for over a year by the time he was added. I get that it still hasn't been printed yet, but there was really no need to do him dirty like that. Zone has lines with Muyon Curry and Diane Keto the Cure Master, because the director of 5D said these kinds of healing cards were inside his machine and keeping him alive. Despite having an animation for it, Yuma Tsukumo does not have a line for Ultimate Leo Utopia Ray, due to it not being revealed yet at the time their dialogue was recorded. The Japanese version reuses dialogue for the summoning chant, whereas the English version uses the infamous "I special summon a monster." Reginald Shark Castle calls Hidden Fangs of Revenge by the wrong name, instead calling it Secret Retaliation. I don't know where this came from, as to my knowledge it wasn't called that in the manga or the original Japanese name, and I think the card had already been revealed when these lines were done. Looks like this is just another Aigami incident here. Bronx Stone has a line with number 39, Utopia, because he had it and used it during his duel against number 96. Tori Meadows has lines with the agents because she used them in some video games, and apparently her Japanese voice actress actually played them in real life as well. Kite Tenjo calls Galaxy Wave a trap card. I genuinely have no idea how this made it into the final game. I guess it was just an oversight. Trey has a line with number 32, Shark Drake, because he was the one who originally had it and then passed it on to Shark. Quattro has lines with various Gravekeeper's cards, because we saw that they were his previous deck in the past, at least when Shark saw it. Quentin is full of trivia, so much that I coined the term the Quentin treatment. He has lines for BES and Cosmo cards, which are all space themed, like the few cards that he ended up playing in the anime. Anna Kaboom was the first character in the game to have a voice line with a Link monster, that being her double-headed Anger Knuckle. Garag has lines with various hand cards like Rocket Hand, Jack in the Hand, and Kawaki Meru Power Hand. Rio has lines with Amabie, which didn't exist during the ZEXAL era. The likely reason she got lines with the card was because she was initially in the hospital during the anime. The Amabie card was released during the COVID-19 pandemic, after numerous Japanese Twitter users made posts seemingly using the yokai to ward off the disease. It also helps that this is a water card. Alito has lines for various punching-related spells and traps, like Set Uppercut or Continuous Destruction Punch. He also has lines with some counter traps that fit his character, like Chivalry or Face Off. Yuya doesn't have lines with any of the Odd Eyes cards that didn't appear in the anime or manga. I think they cut a bunch of possible cards from his lines as a whole, due to the sheer number he could have had. Think about it. Odd Eyes, Performapal, all of his spells and traps, the Pendulum Magicians, Yuya would have had an obscene amount of voice lines had they actually done everything under his umbrella. So they kinda had to make some cuts here and there. Yuto says he uses one overlay unit for Dark Rebellion's effect, which was how it worked in the anime. In real life, however, it's always required two, so this just seems like an odd decision to include, because it never would have had the anime effect in Duel Links. Yugo never refers to High Speed Roid Rubber Band Shooter as a Speedroid card, instead just calling it Rubber Band Shooter in all three of his lines for it. Yuzu has a summoning chant for Mozarta, the Melodious Maestra, before she summons it. This is likely because it was her true ace before she learned how to fusion summon. Selena has lines for a bunch of generic fusion spells and traps because reasons, I guess. If it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. Gong is the only playable character in the game to only have lines with monsters and no spells and traps. Though to be fair, I guess Scud came kinda close. Silvio has lines for the cards he told Yuma were weak, as well as for Stargazer and Timegazer Magician, since he had briefly stolen them. Declan Akaba has lines with Archfiend Soldier and Beast of Talwar, since he had both of them in the Arc 5 manga. Sora doesn't have summon chants for the non-anime Frightfurs, as well as Wolf, since I guess it didn't have one in the anime. Seems like they just didn't feel like coming up with anything from scratch for him, which they tend to do for a lot of these characters when it comes to their non-anime and manga cards. Shea Obsidian has lines for Little Fairy and Marauding Captain. Little Fairy actually had some relevance to his character and backstory, whereas Marauding Captain was simply a card he was shown to have played in the past. Yusaku has a voice line for Forge a New Future, although he calls it by its original Japanese name of Prisoner of Destiny, due to the English name not being revealed yet at the time. Varus corrected this in his line with the card. Soulburner is the only character in the game whose ace monster needs to be summoned a certain way to get its animation. In his case, you need to reincarnation link summon his Heat Leo. Gore has lines with G-Golem Crystal Heart due to his connection to Earth in the anime, although the two are no longer together in the Duel Links timeline. Blue Angel has a line with Dark Angel because of how she was connected to it in the VRAINS anime thanks to Spectre. When Revolver declares an attack with Borreload Dragon, his sprite adjusts his visor to cover his eyes, just like it did in the anime. And that's every playable character in Duel Links, with at least one piece of trivia for all of them. If you can call it that. I think some of these were kind of stretches, because, I mean, it's really just kind of hard for some of these characters, especially with like a lot of the VRAINS in the Arc 5, where there really just wasn't anything crazy in their voice lines. It was all just fairly straightforward. They got their archetype, and that was it. There wasn't really too many like obscure references in them. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I think maybe if Duel Links lasts like another like 5 years, I don't think it will, but if it does, I think I might do like an updated version of this. You know, who knows? Well, we'll get there when we get there. But this is Emerald, going forth and not looking back.